Bursts of rain through the morning here, whereas towards the southeast of the UK it's a brighter picture, generally fine here throughout the day, and brighter towards the north and northwest with just 1 or 2 showers around at times. In the sunshine towards the southeast becoming very warm, 23 or 24 degrees, the mid-70s in Fahrenheit, and even towards the north not bad at 18 Celsius. As for Monday, well, that band of rain will pep up once again across that central slice of the UK, so parts of Wales, the Midlands, northern England, even the southwest of England could see some rain at times on Monday. Brighter with a few showers towards the southeast and generally turning a bit brighter with scattering of showers as we head into Tuesday and Wednesday.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 11 o'clock. Very good evening to you here from the GB Newsroom. I'm Aaron Armstrong. More than 50 overlooked towns in the UK will be given £20 million each to regenerate high streets and tackle antisocial behaviour. The Prime Minister will announce £1 billion worth of investment in an effort to help local people improve their own communities. 55 towns, including 7 in Scotland and 4 in Wales, will be given the funding over the course of a decade. It's likely to involve auctioning empty high street shops, reforming licensing rules on bars and restaurants and supporting more housing in urban centres. Liz Truss will urge the Conservative leadership to cut corporation tax back to 19%. The former Prime Minister will say the Tories must position themselves as the party of big business again to stimulate growth. She's to make a speech on the fringe of the Tory party conference. Cutting corporation tax was included in her mini-budget during her brief tenure in Downing Street, which sent the pound tumbling. Ms Truss is one of dozens of Tory MPs who've promised not to support the Chancellor's autumn statement if it contains tax rises, along with the former party chairman, Sir Jake Berry.
All too often, we have seen these promises and pledges made by MPs across the political divide that haven't materialised. That is why this tax pledge is different. It isn't connected to the Conservative Party. It is a direct pledge from me to my constituents in Rosendale and Darwen and to the British people that I will not vote to put taxes up. It's for keeps. It is a pledge that I will stick to as long as I am a Member of Parliament.
The family of the school coach driver who died in a crash on the Wirral yesterday have described him as a loving husband and father. They say Stephen Shrimpton suffered medical issues at the wheel of the coach. The 40-year-old was a father to 2 children. The 15-year-old Jessica Baker also died in the crash, and 4 other children were taken to hospital, including a 14-year-old boy whose injuries are said to be life-changing. The ASLEF union has denied today's train strikes were politically motivated after the government said it was planned to coincide with the Conservative Party conference. Train drivers at 16 operators in England walked out in their long-running dispute. Another strike is planned for Wednesday when the conference ends. And many parts of the country had no service at all, and those that did run finished earlier than usual. And hundreds of demonstrators lined the streets of London to protest against the Rosebank offshore development earlier. They're demanding the government reconsider approval for the controversial oil field. Located 80 miles west of Shetland, it is the UK's largest untapped field and is estimated to contain up to 300 million barrels of oil. And that is it from the moment from the GB newsroom. Now it is time for headliners.
Hello and welcome to Headliners. I'm Stephen Allen and I'm joined by Mad Dog Lewis Schaefer and Big Dog Nick Dixon. We have a lot of dogs here, but no foxes. How are we both doing? We managed to get, well, not quite through the weekend yet. We're halfway through the weekend. Survived so far?
It's a great time for you, Steve. It's a great time to be a moderate lefty with an interest in science, because I can't see that really going wrong for you.
I mean, it's mainly career-wise for the next couple of weeks, but personally, it's not a great place to be. On the dating scene, it wasn't good back in the day.
Yeah, don't put it in your Tinder bio. Let them find out gradually.
Yeah.
Can I be a moderate lefty with an interest in science?
I'd love you to try, but I don't think it would land.
As I said last night, I did a chat GPT and asked if I was a right-wing comedian. And they said no, ChatGPT, so it must be true.
It must be true then. So if the only people who think you've got reasonable views are computers or something, well, fair enough. Let's move on to the front pages and see how we get along. To the Observer, Education Ministry keeps secret files on critics of schools policy. We'll talk about that later. The Sunday Telegraph, Shaps to send UK troops to Ukraine. The Sunday Times, Badenoch piles pressure on Sunak to quit ECHR. The Sunday Express, £1 billion lifeline for derelict high streets. The Sunday Mirror, the baby who can't cry. And the Daily Star, Sunday goes with Socks Maniac. And those were your front pages. All right, kicking off this in-depth look at Sunday's front pages, let's go to the Sunday Times. Lewis, what have they got?
Well, it says Badenoch piles pressure on Sunak to quit ECHR. I don't know whether it's piling pressure on. She did an interview with the Sunday Times, this woman, Kemi Badenoch, who I'm finding out more about. And the way I think what's happening is the Sunday Times is kind of positioning her to be the new replacement for Rishi Sunak, because she's coming out with all these great ideas, and she's just the latest person who's... and I think because she's a person of color, she was born in Nigeria, she actually grew up in America, and then she moved back here. So if it's quite possible she could represent 3 countries.
And someone who left America because their career needed it, you've got a lot in common with this, is that...
Yeah, I think with her it's going to work out better than it's worked out for me.
Yeah. Nick, you'll know about this. Look, some people think that Rishi's benefiting from having people around him saying things that he can't get away with saying, but the core voter might like to hear. any weight to that point?
There is something in that. I mean, you could argue why is Rishi not able to get away with him? If we're saying that Suella and Kemi can get away with him because of, are you suggesting it's because of racial grounds or something?
No, well, for the stuff, the people I've heard opining about this on podcasts, it's more that he wants to be not associated with some of these points of view, so he can still garner the votes from the more moderate electorate, but still appeal to the people who like these.
I suppose when you're the leader of such a broad church as the Conservative Party, you have to do an element of that. You have to appease both sides of your party. I think it's totally reasonable. Kemi is seen by the sort of Remainer professional managerial class as some sort of extremist, when actually she's just very sensible. And she points out that this policy is sensible. There's nothing extreme, she says, about changing something that's, laws that were made 100 years ago, and she thinks it's perfectly reasonable. Much as with net zero, she thinks it's perfectly reasonable to amend some of these things. She talks about it needs updating and reviewing the ECHR, law, and I think that's completely reasonable. I don't see what's wrong with that, really.
OK. And we can almost stick with kind of the same stories. We go to the Sunday Telegraph. Nick, what have they got on their front pages that's almost linked?
Yeah, so linked story is Sunak set to ignore European judges blocking Rwanda plan. And the idea is that Sunak could get around this legally, this attempt to ground the deportation flights using the new Illegal Migration Act, which always sounds to me like they're saying the act itself is illegal, like they've just got it through somehow. But it's the Illegal Migration Act. And Suella Braverman could also block any future injunctions, is the idea. And again, I see this as a perfectly positive thing. Why should this European body get to ground our flights? And, do they really have a higher standard of rights and freedoms than us? I doubt it, since we invented most of this stuff. So, that's my thought on that. I don't know if you want to say more about it or go on to the Shap story.
Anything on that slice of it, Lewis?
Well, I think what it is it's like, I think they passed a law, if I got this right. They passed a law recently called the Small Boats Bill, but it's called something else, which says they can basically disobey the European Court of Human Rights, and so what they're saying is they might just say we're not going to listen to the European Court, or we're not going to let them stop us.
Is this just, without getting too much down a rabbit hole, is this one of those things where every so often there's a law where, because you don't like it, you like the idea of being able to go to Europe? Yeah. Like the Human Rights Act was used to manage to stop someone being deported to America. We like that when we didn't like the idea of America nicking our hackers. So is it one of those laws where you only like it when it disagrees with you? You don't like it?
There could be something in that, yeah. I mean, but what do you think? I mean, if we can't do such a simple, basic policy as deporting a few people to Rwanda, is that really workable?
It's not a few people. They're talking about tens of thousands of people. They're doing it. I mean, the problem with Rwanda...
Have they been in touch with you about it yet?
You know what? They should ask me. I mean, they let me into the country, so they're not going to listen. I think the problem is that everybody knows it's a form of punishment. And we're against any kind of punishment in this country or America anymore. They don't want to punish people. And they know being sent to Rwanda is not going to be fun for them.
Before we take up too long on this, let's move on to what is probably the biggest story on the front page of the Telegraph.
Yeah, big story. Shap's to send UK troops to Ukraine. Obviously, this is a development because the army would now, in this, train Zelensky's military on the ground, and the Navy might move into the Black Sea. So this is an escalation, as I'm sure you know. So, and it depends if you think it's a good or a bad thing, I suppose. If Leo was here, he'd be shouting about why it's a great thing, I'm sure. But some people will see this as an escalation, Britain getting more involved than we have to. I suppose a counter might be if it puts more pressure on Russia and ends the war sooner. That's another argument. But some people see it as not a good thing.
This is an horrendous thing. That first of all, they're not putting troops exactly. They're training the troops. They're bringing the troops home. They're sending British troops to the Ukraine to be trained there. So we're sending trainers. That's exactly what happened in Vietnam. That's how it all started, with Kennedy sending training people. I don't know whether you remember that, because you don't remember it, but that's what happened. So that's a huge problem. The Russians are prone to sending missiles that are going to kill those British troops. Once those British troops are killed, boom, Britain is in it. So it's a nightmare. But the big way, before you go on, the biggest nightmare is right now, and nobody knows this, Russia is winning. They are winning. The problem isn't getting Russia to stop doing what it's doing. The problem is getting the Ukraine to just say, okay, we're going to accept things the way they are. And the way the Russians are winning is they basically blocked off all of the grain from leaving the country through the Black Sea. Well, that's the Russian side, but through whatever that area is over there. And so they can't get the grain out.
It's the first time I've heard you say anything positive about eating carbs.
Well, it feeds the world. It feeds the Ukraine, and they're in deep trouble. And if we send our ships there, what's going to happen is the Russians are going to attack those ships, and then we'll be in a state of war with Russia.
The positive is he at least said he was going to probably increase defence spending and ruled out diversity quotas in the military. I only have one line on that story, but I already know that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Sunday Express, Lewis, what are they going with?
Well, Rishi Sunak levelling up boost for forgotten towns. I mean, he's trying to get re-elected, so he's spending money that he doesn't have on a situation that he himself... It's a £1 billion lifeline for derelict high streets. And basically, he caused the problem, or the other guy, Boris Johnson, the Tories caused the problem because they locked down the entire country, causing rampant inflation.
Well, let me jump in there a little bit. The high streets problems weren't caused by the lockdown. They were slowly being vacated for years.
Yeah, by high rates. I'll tell you what's killed the high street. High rates and no parking. They basically eviscerated the parking from the high street. So everybody went off to Tesco's and Sainsbury's where there was parking. This has been a war on small businesses, and sending £1 million is not going to help the high street.
Well, it's billions.
£1 billion.
Nick, £1 billion. Where's he going to get the money? He could get it from all of that misspent PPE contract. No, wait a minute. They're not looking into that. It's a shame. Yeah. Where else would he get the money?
Yeah, well, at least I don't know where he's going to get it from. It's going to the north, though, so it can't be bad. I've heard it's going to Hull and Sandwell. Could be wrong. I'm sure I'll get some tweets. But it's good that he's doing it because Boris, after all, won on a mandate of levelling up. So eventually we're back to that. And a cynic will say just before the election he's trying to win back red wall seats. But of course, I'm not a cynic, so I'd never say that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And then finally we move on to the Daily Star. Nick, what are they going with and why?
A big one here. It's Socks Maniac. So England star gets his tackle out, which is a kind of pun, for romp, but refuses to take off his not very romantic ankle warmers. So a randy England footy ace, are there any other kind of footy ace? I sometimes wonder. Scored with a model, another pun, but insisted on keeping his socks on the whole time. So, but luckily it was all over in minutes anyway. So it's classic Daily Star. I'm almost surprised we've covered that because, you know, we want to be highbrow here, Steve, but we've not quite... That's fallen short of our high standards, I would say. I think we should apologise.
I think the Daily Star should, because I thought this is the kind of story you get 10 years ago. The idea that footballer sleeps with model.
Yeah.
What? How is this news? I presumed they all did, and why are we hearing about it?
And especially in this day and age when the worst thing the guy did was keep his socks on. I mean, there's a lot of the news where people have done so much worse than this.
It can aid grip if you're on carpet as well, so I really don't know what the complaint is.
Yeah.
Fair enough, we'll move on. That's it for part one, but coming up, we're running out of Tories, sexist CEOs, and is the government spying on you? Find out next.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. I'm Stephen Allen, still here with Lewis Schaefer and Nick Dixon, as if Ofcom weren't busy enough this week. To the Mail on Sunday, Lewis. Rishi Sunak attacks the BBC and not for cancelling the MASH report, which I'm sure he's still bitter about.
Well, and it's a fantastic thing. I used to love. I didn't watch you on it, but I know that you were there, and it was a good thing. Yes, my friend is there. Anyway, Rishi Sunak slams the BBC for inaccurate commentary and accuses public broadcaster of refusing to publish figures showing the UK economy recovered faster than France and Germany post-pandemic. And this has to do with the GDP, which they were showing a reduction in the GDP, a negative a shrinkage in the GDP, and it really turned out to be 1.8% higher than at pre-COVID levels, which is more than Germany and more than France. But did the BBC report it? No, they didn't report it. This is the most interesting story because people don't know. They think that the BBC is an arm of government, and it's an independent thing. They're all like self-employed.
You're the one who calls it the state propaganda network on this show most nights.
They are the state propaganda network, but the government is not the state. The government is the team world ideology, which has taken over the country, taken over half the country at least, and taken over the world, taken over the European world. It's a bit complicated because I don't really understand it myself. But there's an ideology of team world which all the things fit into, and the BBC is controlled. They either are controlled by it or they actually believe it themselves.
Right, Nick. My slightly cynical take on this is, when the numbers are going well, the Office for National Statistics, that's a great place, but as soon as it said bad things, who would listen to that bunch of nebulous wokery? Is it just a case of picking the numbers that the government likes and then moaning that they're not shouted about more?
Well, I mean, we don't know why the BBC didn't cover it. Sunak's being a little bit wry, saying he's surprised they haven't mentioned it since they covered the story for 2 years, but now it's high, they don't mention it. And one could be forgiven for thinking it's not top of the BBC's list of priorities to say, why Britain's doing better than Europe if you have a sort of Remainer bias. That's what's implied by what Sunak's saying. USA is destroying us. I mean, they've got a 6.1% bounce back. But we are, let's face it, beating Germany. So that's always worth celebrating. We've got 1.8%. France has 1.7%. None of these are amazing numbers. And like I say, we're poorer than, Mississippi now in Britain. So we're not doing great compared to the US. But I do think it should be news. Why does it always have to be negative about Britain? It's an awful place and we're not proud and we're losing and it's terrible. Brexit's terrible. But if we do get a win, which is different to the previous information, it should be publicised.
Yeah, OK. The Observer, Nick, and Suella Braverman's founder, Fan.
Yes, interesting one. Far-right figures praised Braverman's illegal migration comments and vowed to capitalise on her intervention. And they're referring to Mark Collett, who incidentally did a documentary with Russell Brand back in the day, so he'll probably be now disowning Russell Brand, because it's probably worse to be Brand now than it is to be far right. That's where we're at in the world. But yeah, essentially what it was, he was praising. He's from something called Patriotic Alternative Group, and he's praising Suella Braverman's speech. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that Suella Braverman is evil. There seems to be a bit of a hatred of Braverman from places like The Guardian. You're often kind of white middle-class people that hate Braverman, ironically. But just because they agree doesn't necessarily mean that it's Braverman's at fault, right? Because look at our mainstream parties with far left views. You know, both Labour and Lib Dems, both of their leaders believe women have penises, and they often believe in the radical left theory. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I think with migration, you have to be. There are two real groups. There are those who understand that it's a problem that has to be tackled, and then there are people that virtue signal to sound good, but have no solutions for what we're actually going to do about it. To me, those are the two groups.
Do you think there is a third group of people who emotionally hate it more than they should? Or do you think there's just those two groups? It's a problem that needs a bit of a look at, and people who virtue signal. Is there any error on the other side?
No, it's true. Could be people who are obsessed with it, yeah.
Here's someone who puts us off the idea of migration.
Well, I think the migration issue is, first of all, that they've changed the name to migration. It used to be immigration, it was asylum seeking. I mean, this term migration is a recent phenomenon, isn't it? Recent, it seems recent. Anyway, the fact that...
Hasn't it always been the case? If you
it is called
you put
migration.
The prefix in if you want to know the direction.
But it used to be that they say the people who were trying to reach here were asylum seekers, which implied that wherever they came from was way worse than where they're landing here in Britain. Yeah. And by calling it migration, you're thinking, well, it's not... They're basically... They're jigging the language. They're saying it's not that bad there. They're just migrating. So that's a deliberate attempt on the government to control the narrative, which they have every right to do. But we did a thing... There was a poll done, and they said that of the most important issues in the country, only 26% said migration was the most important, was possibly the most important issue. And we at GB News, or whatever we think it's the number one, it's like trans all the time. It just seems that the people don't seem to be that excited about it.
But with the cost of living one surely high up there, because it's in your face, isn't it? 10 quid for a jar of coffee is winding everyone up.
It is, but it's more important than this.
The Sunday...
Was that a good point?
I think you made a good point. I'm still slightly in shock about it. I'm not sure. I'll rethink about it later to try and work out if it wasn't one. The Sunday Telegraph, Lewis, and they could be asking you to stand for election. Oh, no. Could you imagine such a thing?
Yeah, they can't, because luckily I can't vote in this country. And I shouldn't give away my immigration status, because someone might criticise.
They're more worried about the cost of living.
Anyway, yeah. It's Tories fall short of finding 100 new election candidates to meet party conference deadline. They want to get 100 because so many of the Tories are leaving. And they need new people. They've got 65, which is a lot before. They want to prepare the residents of the thing. People don't understand how bad this is, because in America, local people choose the candidate. They have a primary system where they ask the locals, who do you want to like the local Republicans would choose. Here, it comes from above. It's like, you know, we're sending this guy over there to be the candidate. And so they don't speak for the people. I think this country needs a primary system, local community, and that's one. And can I just say that's one of the reasons why the people do not feel that their candidates represent them, especially the Tories.
Interesting, Nick. They set their own deadline, didn't they? They've missed their own deadline. It's this Greg Hans guy sets the deadline, misses it. It's just an error of deadline making more than anything else. Yeah, that part's not particularly interesting, is it? It's quite interesting to think about. I've thought about trying to be a candidate, and I do know some people that can make it happen. Because I thought, get in low when the party's at the bottom, and no one even wants to be a member. I mean, look at it. You've got nearly 50 Tories saying they plan to quit Parliament rather than face the next election. This is the time to get in. Buy low, whatever it is. But then I realised they would simply go through everything I've ever said, which they're already doing now, so they're just fine. And the hundreds of hours of my podcast, you know, it's just, I'll be cancelled immediately before I get to even fix a single hospital ward, so I don't think there's much future in it. But even with that, given that they struggle to get even 100 people to stand, you could be cancelled and they still might have to say, please stand for
we have no one, right, just the absolute dregs.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's what I'm running, that's my campaign slogan.
Just business cards. The Observer, Nick, and this government is monitoring some of our social media, so at least someone's reading my tweets.
Yeah, this is quite disturbing. It's revealed UK government keeps files on education critics' social media activity. So what that means is, if you've criticised the Department for Education, they're keeping files on you, some as long as 60 pages, and people are finding this out, and they're absolutely stunned by it. Of course, it's The Guardian, so you take it all with a pinch of salt, but it does seem to be quite disturbing. It's one of those things we can do. We have the technology, but it doesn't necessarily mean we should do it. And I might add a caveat here that perhaps the reason is that they're so worried in the Department for Education about hiring someone for a speech that in 2 years, turns out to be a wrong or is not the flavour of the month and is then cancelled. So not that I'm saying I'm excusing this, but you can see how it's a vicious cycle. Like, tell you what we better do, get a 60-page file on you just in case we're embarrassed in the future. So the whole thing is disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis, is it a detailed file and it's all some sort of suspicious thing, or are they just printing off people's tweets just to make sure you've not said bad stuff?
I don't know, because I've been through similar things in Southwark, where I'm from, where they've decided they keep track of people and they say, well, we're not going to let this person participate in this situation because he's trouble. So I believe this thing is worse than you think. And the government shouldn't...
But why... But the thing about maybe it is just tweets in case. Yeah. Because if you delete a tweet and they want to point out your hypocrisy at some stage... I'm not saying I like it, but... It
shouldn't be the government. This DFE is a department for education. It's part of the state, whatever, the government. I don't know what you call it. Yeah. The authority, part of Whitehall. So it's not benign. It's not like, oh, we're just keeping, some... guy in town keeping a record.
There's one department that should be doing its homework, though.
Yeah, very good.
The Telegraph, Lewis, and the financial regulator is apparently stamping out sexism. Have they been asked to lend a hand around here?
Yeah, well, this is also troubling, because this is part of the Team World's thing, which is we don't care about money because we have so much money, these rich people. Anyway, financial regulators' quote-unquote mission creep on stamping out sexism in the city is overkill, says Tory MPs, and this is the Common Sense group of MPs. And they say the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, should stay purely focused on protecting consumers by promoting competition and ensuring market integrity when they're constantly worried about sexism in the City of London and women and Brexiteer Nigel Farage, our own guy, he was debanked by Coots, but the FCA said we didn't see any problem there, when it was right in front of them.
It's almost, I know it's in the same article, it does seem like it's a separate thing. Nick, I honestly don't know which way to fall down on this, because half of the argument is, actually, if you have some sort of sexism trouble on the board level, it's bad for your profit, so they are following profit. But we already have laws against it. Help me out and teach me some wisdom, Nick.
Well, my concern is it's always dangerous when large companies or institutions take what are actually ideological actions and they implement essentially highly contested political ideas as if it's just an objective standard. So it's just dangerous when they go beyond their remit. The other point is they're not doing their actual job, which is being pointed out here. This is my concern. Why are they delving into this territory? And this is the argument of the 14 MPs who have written this letter. And they say, in short, we fear that this regulator has adopted an activist interpretation far removed from the principle of equality that our voters would understand or support. That's the thing, when they've gone beyond their remit in a potentially dangerous way, or certainly unhelpful.
Do you see that there could be a link, the argument that's made in there about the fact that profits will be impacted by some sort of a sexist scandal? And if your job is to try and make sure that, you are making good profits, you can make an argument about sticking your nose in.
You can, but that's a business decision. This happened in America in before 2008 with the prime, whatever, the prime loan for the banks.
Subprime, all that.
Subprime, where they said we can't worry about making money. We've got to just help certain groups, and they gave out massive loans to people, a massive number of loans to people who couldn't pay it back because they were trying to do the right thing, and then 2000. The Lehman Brothers and the whole thing collapsed.
Definitely feel no clearer about that now. That's what I expected.
Okay, sorry.
That's it for part 2, but coming up in part 3. You can't even say fat anymore, even though I definitely just did. And pronouns could be a problem for the Navy. Well, they do use the word his in most of the ship's names. We'll find out more soon.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. Let's move now to the Sunday Telegraph. And Nick, the NHS has some private dicks, which seems fitting.
That's good. That was a good one. I was laughing inside. NHS trusts hiring ex-police officers in move that could discourage whistleblowers. So the Telegraph is revealing that retired officers have been employed by a trust currently under scrutiny for its treatment of doctors who raise patient safety concerns. And one has taken up a patient safety incident investigator role worth more than $57,000 a year, Steve. Can you imagine that much money? So
no.
So this is the critique is that if you've got police there, it's not going to encourage people to come forward, especially if there's some indication that in the past this has happened. You've been the person that comes forward and you get blamed. You know, this is the kind of thing that happens with bad management, that you can't bring anything up or you're the one that gets blamed. The messenger is shot, so to speak, and that's the concern.
It's definitely happened as well, these vexatious investigations. But it's almost, the thing that almost bothers me with the story is that was happening whether they were hiring former cops or not. That's not really the scary bit. It's the practice of investigating someone as a punishment for whistleblowing.
Right, and the fact that the NHS is not doing these trusts. You know, it's probably not all trusts, but some of these trusts, like with the Lucy Letby situation, people made complaints about her, and she was not, and it wasn't respected, and they. You know, they were one woman, I think, of the Lucy Letby thing. She had a nurse. She had to make an apology, a formal apology, when Lucy Letby was killing people.
Some doctors had to do mediation with her as well.
Yeah.
The other side of this would be, surely they're allowed to have investigations to look into this stuff. You can't defang a trust if it wants to defend itself, Nick.
No, well, I see what you mean. It just depends, doesn't it, if they actually are doing a good job and finding the... It's so important to find out these where negligence has occurred. But the danger is that you're penalising the whistleblower. Honestly, Steve, I've just read this tonight, and it's going to shock you. I don't actually have the solution. I know that's what you're looking to me for.
Yeah, I thought you'd have nailed this one and moved on to the next one by now.
No, I was trying to just think of funny things to say about it, and I can confirm there aren't any. Actually, you did one in the intro, and that's the only joke that can be made about this.
It's the grimmest story.
It's one of the grimmest, driest stories we've ever done. And we've done some grim, dry stories, Steve, believe me.
My only way out of it was a rude joke that was, you know, parts-based. So, you know, it's clearly not high standards. To the Telegraph, Lewis, and the Navy has a problem with gender-specific words. You wait till they find out they employ loads of seamen.
Yes, and that's one of those words. The Navy personnel told to introduce themselves with pronouns in trans guidance. So it's basically, this is another one of those woke stories. The Navy goes woke. Then they've got words like a bosun. Isn't that a Navy word?
Yeah, like the Higgs boson.
Yeah, not that. It's a different, whatever it is, a petty officer. Those are only two that I can think of. And the truth is that people don't introduce themselves on a ship by Mr. or Mrs. or G. They go petty officer this. They don't. I don't think they in the Navy. They don't go Mr.
Yeah.
Or do they?
No,
I don't know, maybe in Britain they do.
In the article, it says that a way to improve inclusivity is to introduce yourself with your pronouns. No, to be accepting of someone else's pronouns would surely be all the inclusivity you need to make everyone make sure that they introduce themselves with these second or third person pronouns. Seems a bit of a strange way of doing it. Nick, I reckon I could slightly guess your take on this.
How dare you?
Fan of it?
I'm a complex, rounded person, Steve, with many views you couldn't possibly guess. What was your guess?
I don't think you're a fan.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
You were right. Yeah, I mean, look, this idea of constantly educating yourself, educating is one of these words that woke people... There is a real meaning of education, which you'll be familiar with, but that's a word they use meaning become indoctrinated. They're going to be told that white privilege is a thing, which is a kind of racist quack theory, and they're going to be told that if you're white, whatever situation you're in, it is almost always the case that the outcome has not been affected by your skin colour. But tell the poor white boys who are the demographic least likely to go to university in this country, and white people earn 30% less, or white men, I think it might be, than like Chinese people in this country, for example. So I don't know, why is that? They might say it's nothing to do with skin colour, but it's certainly worth looking into.
No,
so, what? You don't
know how more poor those poor white boys, or more poorly educated those poor
they
white
would have
boys would have been. It's like when they said Oprah Winfrey is a victim of racial discrimination, and she's like multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know how much she could have accomplished if she wasn't a person of colour.
That is true. The point is, though, that it's a contested theory, so why are they being taught it? And as a former admiral here says, you know, they're trying to serve as one company. So anything that focuses on dividing people into little subgroups, in this case race, is a terrible idea for something that needs to be a cohesive unit, obviously.
And this is done by the Tory government. So, you know...
Under the Tory government, yes.
Under the Tory government. That's, at the end of the day, that's all you need to know, is that this country's been taken over by Team World. The Tory government's been taken over by Team World.
Every time you say Team World, in my head, I'm hearing Team America World Police. I don't know why.
You know what? That's another Team World.
All right.
There's lots of places. Well, what would you call it? I don't know what to call it. It's a European globalist, you know, German, France...
We'll get some verbs and come back with a sentence in that later. The Independent, Nick, and someone has found a way to get net migration down, it seems.
Yeah, nice, yes. This is almost half of young black Britons plan to migrate amid racism concerns. Landmark study highlights. They've asked more than 10,000 black British people, and this is led by The Voice newspaper. So, quite a shocking one. And you wonder why this is, because, you know, one could cite the Sewell report, and one could easily argue Britain is one of the least racist countries in the world. I think that's basically a fact at this point. And so, but then, of course, you know, if that's these people's experience, then that's their experience. But I wonder if it's something that's been foregrounded unnecessarily. I mean, Lester Holloway of The Voice says there needs to be a national conversation about this, and we need race back on the political agenda. And I'm thinking, this is all we talk about. Can we get it off the political agenda for about a day? Because we didn't used to have these problems. It seemed like we'd, to some degree, solved this problem, and now it's back. And, OK, I don't know these people's individual experiences, so there is that. But I think it's an illusion that there's this perfect place elsewhere, that Britain's this racist place, you know, and there's no utopia elsewhere. Like Michael Oakeshott said, you know, it's better to have present laughter than utopian bliss, and that's the Conservative point of view anyway, that actually Britain is relatively a pretty great place.
Is it in any way similar to those people who'll say, like, if Labour get in, I'm going to leave? Wasn't that an Alan Sugar thing? Is this not exactly Alan Sugar writ large?
Well, I don't know about that, but I know that this is a very optimistic poll. It says only 39% aspire to live elsewhere. And that's pretty much probably, if you ask every person, every group of people in this country, if they want to live somewhere else, I guarantee you 39%. So it's not just black people that want to. There's something inherently British about wanting to get the hell off this island.
There is something about it. I mean, Britain is falling apart. I've said it's a great country, but I'm also saying it's also falling apart. The two are somehow true at the same time. And so that is also okay. If they just want to leave because of cost of living and cost and just everythingness, then that's okay. But can I just say some of the examples are pretty poor that are sort of said to be racial. Examples given of fitting in include altering clothing and hairstyles, speech patterns, okay, and being expected to join workmates at the pub after work. That's a problem in any job.
Yeah.
And it's tough at GB News because, you know, people come in and out so fast. So it's just, you know, meeting workmates after... I mean, is that really a unique black problem?
No, he's not unique. I tell you what, it's an introvert problem. As whenever I do the tests, I come out as, like, ridiculously highly introverted. And the idea of having to go to a pub with people... Oh, I can feel the sweat kicking in. Oh, dear. The Telegraph, Lewis, and I could probably twist your arm and try and get you to talk about other people's diets. I know you don't really want to. Yeah. But please, just for a few hours.
Do you know what? You're fat. You're fat. We've become a nation too scared to say being fat is unhealthy. And the fact is, being fat isn't unhealthy. It's just a sign of unhealthiness. This is in the Telegraph, and what they're trying to show that too many people are fat, and we've got to stop people from being fat. But the truth is that. I think I look a bit fat on TV, but I look amazing. If you saw me in real life, you'd say, wow, he's really slender. But the truth is...
Opinions may vary.
You can be fat and healthy. There are percentages of the population that are fat and healthy, but mostly it's a sign that your diet is filled with fat-causing food.
So the point of this is that you can't say fat to say it's bad for your health. And the argument for that is, so you're calling people fat, oh, if you get upset by it, I'm just trying to help you out for your health. No one ever does the same argument about smokers. No one feels that we should be telling you stink. In fact, often, the kind of people who think, well, it's a personal choice and let you smoke if you want, and we should be able to call people fat. Seems like that Venn diagram doesn't fit the way it should.
Well, but the problem is that everybody knows that they've caused being fat themselves. But at the same time...
They didn't smoke at their own cause.
Right. But at the same time, they know that it isn't their fault because food is so delicious. The sugar is guaranteed to make people fat.
Can you call people fat, Nick? I mean,
I've been called it quite recently, but we shouldn't. It's not nice to call people fat, and it's obviously it's not nice. It's a ridiculous statement. But there's a difference between that and saying it's good to be fat or fine, because we all know actually it isn't. One, it's not good aesthetically. We know. Two, it's not good for your own health. Three, it's a drain on resources, right? The NHS and so on. So we know that. And when we see a transformation photo on Twitter, now X, we all celebrate, go, well done, you lost all that weight, because we know that's actually a good thing. So there's this illusion, this lefty nonsense that, like, everything... Sorry, Steve, but there's this idea in our culture. Let's say there's this idea in our culture. Everything is equal. Nothing has inherent good or inherent bad. And that's just false. There are things that are inherently good, inherently bad, and that's just how it is.
But do you feel that you can't call people fat? This story almost says, like, oh, you can't call people fat these days. I think you can. I think it happens in this show. It must happen on social media, as you say.
No, you cannot call
inherently from the liking thin people.
I call people fat, but I don't call people fat. I call men fat. You can tell a man. I can say, hey, you're fat. And that's what men do with each other. But I think with women, they're a bit more sensitive about that. They take their looks seriously. And what I would like to say is, it's so hard to lose weight, and it's so easy to gain weight. And the food itself that's in our food supply is so readily available that there's no shame in being fat. The only shame is in not recognizing that we've been lied to about the food supply.
Less fat-shaming than I expected, but a little bit more misogyny. Interesting. The Daily Mail, you can't say that about women. They're sensitive. Enjoy your tweets.
Sorry.
Nick, we go on this one. This is about Bambi. Has it become woke? No, I want my kids to see more graphic deer death.
Yeah, it's former Disney screenwriter behind Bambi remake calls for scene in which the famous deer's mother dies to be scrapped because it's too triggering for parents and children. And of course, it is a traumatic scene, but it's also an iconic scene. It was also the whole point of it. You know, you remember it, it sort of stays with you, which maybe is a problem, but I think it's pretty absurd when we're cancelling Bambi. I mean, it's the whole point of the film. And we have an opportunity here, actually Conservatives have an opportunity, because woke movies are so bad, because the hero's journey, I would argue, is inherently conservative. It's about personal striving and the individual and so on, and overcoming. So I think there's an opportunity because they're going to keep ruining films, and so hopefully we're going to start making some good ones on the more conservative side.
But it's not been cancelled. They're making another version with a less traumatic death scene. You can still show your kids the original if you want.
Right, and it's not the same film. And it's every filmmaker has a right to make their artistic statement the way they want to make it. The way they want to make it. And this person didn't want to include the thing. And the reason why no one even sees Bambi nowadays is because of that scene. So if you want your movie to be seen, it was reported that no one, the kids today don't go see Bambi.
I like the fact that the person they were talking about, is it the writer, left the project because she went off to direct Pet Sematary 2. Yeah, who wouldn't? That's more wholesome. I'll show my kids that one. That's it for part 3, but coming up in the final section, we'll be all supportive about women's football, but for balance, we'll let Lewis talk about what Lawrence Fox said. Coming up soon.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Lewis, the Metro claims that GB News has descended into chaos. Let me refute that. This place has always been chaos, especially since you joined.
Yeah, it's, I don't know if it's more chaotic than normal. Tonight's been a chaotic night, but the GB News actually descends into chaos with unhinged stunt after Lawrence Fox fallout. This was on last night's show. And you have a bit of video, do you know?
We can, indeed. In case you missed it, we can show you the clip now.
Chaos at GB News. And it's this idea that all of these people are saying that we have complete turmoil in the office. Yeah. And we're just getting on with our lives. And we're just trying to carry on as sensible broadcasters. Yeah. And I think everyone is just using this opportunity to attack us.
Tell us more.
Well, somebody barged into the studio, got in illegally, and we're a very heavily protected studio here because... And as he continued speaking, right, a man with unruly hair. This is what as Andrew was speaking, a man with unruly hair and a tie around his head came running onto the set and started throwing newspapers into the air while screaming and running in front of the panel, which also included Louis Schaefer.
Did it actually say that?
Yes, and Nick DeSanto. Yeah, they name checked me.
Oh, you only read out your own name. That's good.
Yes.
It's not clear whether that's a good thing this week, but yeah, they did mention it. I mean, yes, it's the lowest form of journalism, isn't it, where you pretend not to understand context to generate clicks. And then you read the article and they call it an unhinged stunt. And it's like, OK, are they getting the joke, or are they still pretending not to? Because you could just see it as not a stunt where people deliberately behave unhinged, but simply an unhinged stunt in motivation. I mean, I wasn't in that night, Steve. It's a bit broad for my taste, that kind of humour, but it's clearly a joke, and so this is completely insane.
No, I don't think that they got it. I don't think that they understood.
Really?
Yeah, if you read the thing, it doesn't. I don't think that they got it, because like every joke, like on April Fools, you go April Fools. They would have said something already.
They do say here, to be fair, they're pretty sharp. They say all three men seemed unperturbed by what was unfolding, making it pretty obvious it was all planned. So they sussed that it was planned. So they're pretty sharp on that. But that's what it doesn't necessarily say a joke. It says it's planned. It was a good performance for everyone, though, I have to say. Everyone kept their cool, though Nicholas DeSanto only has deadpan as a setting anyway, so it's easy for him.
On to the Sunday Times, Nick. And are modern fathers getting a raw deal? And as a modern dad who spent 10 hours today looking after his son, who didn't nap before driving in to do this, please say yes.
I will say yes, Steve, on your behalf. Even though I'm not a dad, I totally back you. Dad's under pressure. Are modern fathers getting a raw deal? Of course, it seems they are. I mean, and the whole article basically is about how they're trying to do too much. They're trying to be everything to all people, do their job, do everything at home as well, or many things at home. And this is a problem. Ideally, and I hate to say it, Steve, but ideally what works is one person working, one person raising the children. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying which person, the man working, but that's just what works. Now, we can't always have that in this economy, and that's very, very sad. But that just is what works. And the thing that really broke my heart was when men have neglected male friendships, which are crucial, and disappeared from the five-a-side team. I play five-a-side every week. Luckily, the men show up. But there's always that thing, will they be allowed out? And I think that's a sort of tragic thing. But the solution that someone suggests here, Dan Stanley, who has this Better Man service, it may well be a great service, but he talks about the myth of masculinity. We need to address these barriers and the myth of masculinity. No, it's not about addressing the myth of masculinity and men being all touchy-feely. It's about embracing masculinity and allowing men to be men and have male roles. That's what I say. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I'm not complaining about raising the kid. It's brilliant spending time with him. What irks is I do so much childcare, then you go out and someone will say, oh, is Dad looking after you today? Every day. It's not just because I'm there, it's like a babysitter.
But luckily, it's not going to be long, because she's going to divorce you for being a loser.
Yeah.
OK? So I disagree with Nick. It doesn't... And fat. You're not that fat. You're lovely. No, I think I totally disagree. And as a father of three, if you count Jonathan as one of my children, and I was a stay-at-home dad for 3, 4 years, 5 years when the kids were being born, men get no respect for this.
Yeah.
And they get no respect. So men should not stay home. If a woman wants you to do stuff around the house, you just say, I'm sorry or not, and just run off.
Hang on, I think I said that, didn't I?
Yeah. No, you didn't.
We're running out of time. I want to get on this one.
Did you say that women don't find that attractive?
No. The male... No, it's me attractive. I think that's what you both...
Did he say that?
I didn't say that. You
didn't say that. Well, I'm saying that women
Peter Kay, now, he says that political correctness is making comedy harder. It's true. Is this you trying to be politically correct? Lewis, what's your take on this final story?
Sorry, we're skipping. Final story. Hold on a second. I thought we were going to deal with bacteria. Peter Kay claims he's He's one of the funniest comedians, and he says he's written a book. It says, well, here's what the headline says: Peter Kay claims comedy is a minefield, quote, minefield, unquote, due to political correctness as he defends controversial Little Britain sketches.
Okay. We're quickly running out of time. I just want to address that point, Nick. People say you wouldn't be able to make shows like this these days, but there's loads of stand-up stuff that causes the controversy that we talk about on these shows.
That's true, although this idea of a Thai bride called Ting Tong Macadangdang, and Peter Kay's going, it probably wouldn't be made today. I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. So the show's nearly over. Just let's get another quick look at Sunday's front pages. The Observer: Education Ministry keeps secret files on critics of schools policy. The Sunday Telegraph: shaps to send UK troops to Ukraine. The Sunday Times: Badenoch piles pressure on Sunak to quit ECHR. The Sunday Express: £1 billion lifeline for derelict high streets. And the Sunday Mirror gives us the baby who can't cry. The Daily Star Sunday: socks maniac. And those were your front pages. That's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Lewis Schaefer and Nick Dixon. Josh Howie is back tomorrow at 11 p.m, joined by Paul Cox and Adam Bloom. If you're watching at 5, stay tuned for breakfast and have yourself a good one.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and good evening, lovely people. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight, Canadian parents have taken to the streets in cities across their country to tell the government they don't want their children taught about transgenderism in school. We'll be live to Canada, not once but twice, to get both sides of that argument. Plus, a church in Surrey will be holding a service for pets tomorrow. We'll be speaking to the Reverend to ask a simple question: why? All of that and more coming up. But first, an update on the latest news from Aaron Armstrong.
It is 6 o'clock. Good evening to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The driver of a school bus who died after it crashed on the Wirral yesterday has been named as Stephen Shrimpton. The 40-year-old's family says the father of two suffered medical issues at the wheel of the coach. They've paid tribute, describing him as a loving husband and father. 15-year-old Jessica Baker also died in the crash. 4 other children were taken to hospital, including a 14-year-old boy whose injuries are said to be life-changing. A convicted child rapist said to be a high-risk sex offender is wanted by Lancashire Police. The force says 35-year-old Stephen Pennington presents a real risk to children and women. He failed to comply with licence conditions and being recalled to prison. He has links to Blackburn, Blackpool and Wigan, and police are asking anyone who sees him or knows his whereabouts to contact him. Dozens of Conservative MPs have signed a pledge to never again vote for an increase in overall taxes. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss and former party leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith are among those to have signed up, along with 7 former cabinet ministers. The promise means they won't vote for the Chancellor's autumn statement if it contains tax rises, putting further pressure on Rishi Sunak ahead of the Conservative Party conference. Jeremy Hunt's told The Times he wants to stop the vicious circle of ever-rising taxes, but has ruled out cuts in the short term. Former party chairman Sir Jake Berry, who organised the pledge, says it holds the Chancellor to his word.
All too often, we have seen these promises and pledges made by MPs across the political divide that haven't materialised. That is why this tax pledge is different. It isn't connected to the Conservative Party. It is a direct pledge from me to my constituents in Rossendale and Darwen and to the British people that I will not vote to put taxes up. It's for keeps. It is a pledge that I will stick to as long as I am a Member of Parliament.
Well, the Prime Minister, meanwhile, says he's slamming the brakes on the war on motorists. Rishi Sunak has arrived in Manchester ahead of the party conference, which gets underway tomorrow, and he's expected to address the issue this week. He told The Sun harebrained schemes like low-traffic neighbourhoods and 20 miles per hour zones are being forced on drivers. The Department for Transport says guidance will be reviewed to prevent their blanket use in England. Meanwhile, the government says today's train driver strike is clearly political and planned to coincide with the Tory party conference. That's left members at 16 operators in England walked out in that long-running dispute. Many parts of the country had no services, and those that have been running have finished earlier than usual. Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the current offer on the table is reasonable.
It's clearly a political strike timed to coincide with the Conservative Party conference. You don't have to think very carefully to see that's the case. But look, there's a fair offer on the table. Train drivers get paid an average salary of £60,000 for a full-day, 35-hour week. The pay rise that's on the table that they won't put to their members would take that average salary to £65,000 a year. Now, look, I think most of your viewers will look at that and think that is actually quite fair and reasonable.
ASLEF's General Secretary, however, Mick Whelan, has accused the Transport Secretary of not negotiating.
Well, it's not political, it's industrial. Mr Harper and his cronies for the last 16 months have been accusing us of attacking all sorts of events on strike days, which we haven't done. Because we haven't seen Mr Harper, we decided to make a point today. Where's Wally? Where's Mark? Come and see us. We are striking today to get the attention of the Tory party and the government to resolve this dispute.
Hundreds of demonstrators have been staging a protest against the Rosebank offshore development. Rallying in central London, they're demanding the government reconsider approval for the controversial oil field. It's located 80 miles west of Shetland and is the UK's largest untapped field. It's estimated to contain up to 300 million barrels of oil. Robin Wells from Fossil Free London says the oil field will destroy lives.
We've organised this demonstration because we're not shocked and we're not surprised, but we are in danger. And Rosebank will destroy the UK's prospects of being a climate leader, but it'll also destroy lives worldwide. This government is very used to U-turns and we need another one from them. And we need Labour to grow a backbone and say that they would not allow Rosebank to go ahead. They would revoke the licence because it's the right thing to do.
We're live across the UK on TV, digital radio, and on your smart speaker too. Just say play GB News. That's it from me for the moment. Now back to Neil.
In other news, A 15-year-old girl bled to death on a London street. She had been on the bus to school in Croydon. She suffered a fatal wound to her neck. Witnesses described a knife as big as a sword. A policeman tried to stem the crimson, but she died there and then. A spokesman for her school said she had been much loved, and I'm sure she was. Every parent's nightmare, and yet the death of children by knives on the streets of London is a commonplace. And so who are we, and what do we care about? In other news, last week a Nazi was honoured with a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament in front of smiling Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the full complement of MPs, government and opposition. 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, a Ukrainian living in Canada, formerly of the Waffen-SS, was hailed as a hero for fighting Russians in World War II. For those who have forgotten or never learned, or who are in the business of rewriting history to suit the present agenda, it's worth pointing out the Russians were Canada's allies in World War II. They were ours as well, the USA's, of all of us. The Nazis, men like Hunka, were our enemy. Men and boys, women and girls, all bled out in the face of them. The Waffen-SS were the worst of the worst. On Juno Beach in Normandy in 1944, Canadian men and boys fought other soldiers of the Waffen-SS and paid a dreadful price. Per head of population, few nations were as badly hurt in World War II, bled as heavily in defiance of Nazism as Canada. But now her parliament honours a Nazi. Trudeau was on his feet with all the rest, smiling and clapping. Zelensky raised his fist in salute. Later, Trudeau said it was a mistake, for which he bore no responsibility. Apparently, a big boy did it and ran away. Trudeau invited his fellow Canadians to share the shame that was his and those MPs up on their hind legs. He sought to make all Canadians complicit, including descendants of loved ones who bled and died on Juno Beach and elsewhere. An attempt was made to have any account of the event stricken from the record, to pretend it never happened, to memory hole the disgrace. The abhorrence in the Canadian Parliament played out on the eve of Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement. Surely that collision of dates was only a coincidence. Surely that, and no one's idea of a sick joke. So much for the truth of World War II. In other news, back in Ukraine, 500,000 men and boys are cold in the clay and still the meat grinder turns, wheels and gears cheerfully whirling. More men and boys die every day, made into butchered meat. Ukrainians and Russians alike, the meat grinder does not discriminate. Somewhere too, the cash registers are ringing with the profits. Billions of pounds and dollars flow into Ukraine from taxpayers all over the West. Money not yet earned, further burdening working people with yet more impossible unpayable debt and generations as yet unborn. Military analysts say the world is at a more dangerous point than any in living memory. Nuclear war is invoked like an unquiet ghost. All of this is happening now. The dark is rising. But back here in Britain, while blood flows elsewhere in immeasurable volume, while blood flows from the neck of a schoolgirl on a street in Croydon, back here in Britain, it's the season of witch hunts, a blast from the past, but always a crowd pleaser. Why trouble ourselves with the slaughter of children in the streets of the capital city? Why contemplate wholesale slaughter of men and boys in a war that's making billions for some, when there's other blood in the water, easier blood? And so who are we, and what do we want? What is it that we care about? In other news, uncounted numbers are dead or ill after taking state-sanctioned meds marketed as vaccines. Every day there's more evidence to challenge the advertising slogan about safe and effective, but still the jabbing continues. In other news, thousands of excess deaths worldwide are recorded every day, which is to say more people are dying than ought to, with no investigation and no explanation of the cause. The death toll of those who might otherwise have been expected to be alive is the equivalent of a fully laden passenger plane crashing in the UK every day. It's statistically accurate to say the United States lost more people in the 18 to 45 age group after a year of the vaccine rollout than that nation saw fall dead in Vietnam in a decade. But you'd have to look hard to find that bald fact in the archives of the mainstream media. In the face of all this dying, is there outrage and peril clutching by the establishment, by the mainstream media, by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown? I think you'll find that, as with so much else, so much avoidable death, inexplicable death, ugly, bloody death on the streets of London, the usual suspects are mysteriously, you might say, inexplicably sanguine, which is to say, cold-blooded. In other news, ingredients in the products pushed as vaccines are known to pass to babies via their mother's milk, but no one seems to mind very much about that. Heart attacks harvest callow boys on the field of play. Otherwise healthy people die in their sleep. There's disrupted menstruation for half of all women that took the jabs, sampled by one Norwegian study. Think of that for every other mother, sister, daughter. Is there round-the-clock, wall-to-wall outrage about any of that? Are there furious calls for sackings and resignations, for heads to roll, for any of the companies involved to be shut down, or at the very least to have their activities and individuals suspended, subject to investigations? Not that I'm aware of, but correct me if I'm wrong. In other news, the clock is ticking down to the acceptance by default of amendments to the international health regulations curated by the World Health Organization, the same WHO that has software salesman Bill Gates as its biggest funder and therefore its most potent influencer. To its unelected, unaccountable representatives will pass all manner of power and decision-making that has hitherto been in the hands of national governments, and therefore our hands. Those faceless, nameless characters will have it in their unquestioned power to define vaccine products, to define emergencies, to commandeer national spending on solutions deemed necessary. Come December of this year, the situation of before will be utterly changed unless our leaders act to the contrary. If you've seen any sign of that action by our elected representatives, do let me know. In other news, we're encouraged to fear or at least to contemplate once more the threat of nuclear war. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, told an audience in New York that Russia threatens to use nuclear weapons once again. It's heinous, she said. It is dangerous, and in the shadow of Hiroshima, it is unforgivable. Surely she wasn't hoping her listeners would infer from her ambiguous words it was Russia that dropped atomic bombs on 2 cities in Japan. Surely not. In other news, also dangled tantalisingly before us is the threat, at least the rumour, of an energy crisis. Millions of people are wondering if they'll be able to keep their children warm this winter. In other news, there's talk too of an apocalyptic financial crisis born of the Ponzi scheme that is modern money, and therefore the prospect to be sold to us as solutions of central bank digital currencies and digital IDs that will trap entire populations in cages made not of barbed wire but of technology. In other news, millions of people are on the move, millions of people out of Ukraine and millions from scores of countries besides, flowing into Europe and North America from places those people no longer want to be for whatever reason. Who are we, I ask again, and what is it that we care about? Do we pay attention to a world allegedly on the brink of nuclear apocalypse, a world in which wars must be forever to further line the pockets of those already rich beyond the dreams of avarice? Do we pay attention to what's really going on all around us all the time? Or would we rather just watch the mob, the mainstream media mob, the online media mob, doing what the mob does, which is baying always for the next sacrifice, the next throat to be opened, the next witch to be burned? I say events are playing out as they are because the world is in the hands of people who care about nothing and no one except profit and the all-controlling power that unlimited profit affords. Don't be fooled into thinking it's about this ideology or that. Ideology is for the birds, yet more distraction for the well-meaning proles. Nazism, fascism, socialism, communism, free market capitalism, it makes no difference. Those in control and making the decisions care not a jot for ideology, or only in as much as it might get them what they want, which is to say, more of everything. They care as much for the stuff of the natural world as they care for you and me, which is not at all. But surely we must stop and ask questions when the history of Nazism might be being rewritten before our eyes. Is this what happens while we're distracted? Surely it's time to tune out the interference and watch the bigger picture. Is this an attempt to have younger generations think those Nazis weren't the enemy after all? Have we even forgotten what Nazis are? In Canada, during the Truckers' Rebellion, the popular movement that already feels like a half-remembered dream, those men and women were labelled Nazis by Trudeau. It was claimed the honk-honk of their horns was code for Heil Hitler. They were imprisoned, had their funds stolen, lost everything. But fast forward, and a real-life Nazi who fought to further the ambitions of Adolf Hitler is honoured as a hero of freedom. Mention world government and you're labelled anti-Semitic. But the so-called Liberal Government of Canada hosts a Nazi, the ultimate anti-Semites. And what are the consequences? Have the so-called leaders of the West raised the alarm? Have they condemned what happened in that place on that day? Has Trudeau resigned, or any of his fellow parliamentarians humbled by shame? I don't think any of that's happened, and I don't think it will. Here's the thing. We're at a fork in the road from which there's no turning back. We must open our eyes to the much, much bigger picture, see what's really going on. I ask again, who are we, and what is it that we truly care about? That's just my opinion, of course. You can disagree, and please tweet and email throughout the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can tweet as well at GBNews, and I'll try to get your comments later in the show. My guests, Greg Swenson of Republicans Overseas and lovely Ingrid Tarrant, thank you for being with me. Greg, if I can come to you first of all, we were talking, before this started, about war in Ukraine, and we mentioned Canada and what happened in the Parliament. Do we have our eyes completely off the ball, courtesy of distraction?
Well, I think there's a lot of distraction. There's also a lot of censorship, and I hate to use the word misinformation, but this goes to a lot of the Russia-Ukraine arguments that are being made. You mentioned the vaccines in your monologue. Obviously, the pushback, thanks to outlets like this, have been encouraged, or at least discussion has been encouraged. So what was really criminal about the lot going back 3 years now was really criminal is not only wasn't there open dialogue about it, but the government and these institutions like the WHO and in the U.S. the CDC, they were censoring it, and we saw that in some
lying.
Yeah,
actually.
Absolutely. I mean, and they made every effort to really not just criticize it, because that would be discussion if they were criticizing. That's an argument. They weren't even doing that. They were having these people destroyed. If you signed the Great Barrington Declaration, and especially the leaders of it, there was an effort by Fauci and the CDC and the government and the FBI and the DOJ to discredit them, and it, in many ways, it worked, and now we have the outcomes of it.
Ingrid, it just seems to me that we're constantly being encouraged to look at things of relatively negligible importance every day, when all of these things are unfolding around us. Hundreds of thousands dead in Ukraine in a war that won't stop. Nazis given standing ovations in the Parliament. A little girl bleeds to death on a London bus. Yeah. And we're encouraged to look the other way.
Yes, we definitely are. It's all distraction. Do you know the soldiers in Ukraine at the Bakhmut border, their lifespan, do you know how long it was? 4 hours. 4 hours. Now, put that into context with what's going on there. How many are dying as we're on this show now? It's absolutely hideous. And you're right, nobody cares. We look the other way. We have distractions. We don't even have enough time to focus on it long enough before something else comes up and distracts us. Your monologue is full of them. And that's what they're doing all the time to us.
Greg, why is it that the mainstream media, prioritises inconsequential stories and praises itself for investigative journalism when the thousands are dying?
It's amazing. And I remember the left and the media, same thing in most cases, used to be the anti-war party, or the Democrats in the U.S. and perhaps labor here. And that's really changed. But it's also that they don't want you to have the information. They don't want to have the conversations, the discussions. They pick their narratives. And, whether it's the war, whether it's lockdowns, critical race theory, this trans nonsense that they teach in schools, they want that to be the policy. And if they don't want any debate about it, they don't want to have the conversation. And that's what they've been very successful at. And it's not just the mainstream media ignoring it. There is downright censorship, by the social media companies with pressure from the government.
Well, it's
you raised that.
propaganda.
Greg raises the spectre of censorship, and we've got the online safety bill. In amongst everything else, I didn't even mention it, but in amongst everything else that's going on, the mechanisms, the tools are being put in place that will enable the authorities to make sure that we literally cannot talk about these things.
Proactive propaganda. They are deliberately doing that. They're feeding us with this information, and as you rightly say, they're not giving the other side. We're giving the other side here. Thankfully, at GB News, we have that ability. We can have a good discussion, a debate. The argument. It's great to have arguments. It's that form of debate. And let's see, sort of like, you know, back it up. But we are completely silenced. And the awful thing is that the MSM is so powerful. It's everywhere you look. You turn on the radio, you turn on the TV, you read your newspapers, and they're censored. But follow the money. You know, it's sort of like investigative journalists. You do get them out there, but if they write something that doesn't follow the narrative, their article won't be printed.
And the products are coming back out. You know, people are being jabbed again in the States. Mm-hmm. Some people above a certain age are being offered the jab here.
You could see it already. You know, they're looking for the next excuse to have a lockdown. The jabs are out, and people, it's amazing in the mainstream. I was on a show earlier this week talking about the censorship, and I also argued that it turns out that the Great Barrington Declaration, Jay Bhattacharya, was right. And then, of course, she said, well, that's your opinion. And, well, actually, they were right, and lockdowns were destructive for children, and that's why parents are so important here, because they saw the firsthand destructive nature of lockdowns and mask mandates and vax mandates. And so at least let's have the conversation. And I wasn't, my argument wasn't, I'm right, you're wrong, or Great Barrington Declaration was right, you're wrong, although they were right. But whether they were right or not, it should have been a conversation. There should have been a debate. And WHO and CDC and Fauci and all the acronyms shut it down, and they did it quite deliberately. It was no different than the New York Post story and the Hunter Biden laptop. That's information. You can argue about it, you can disagree, that's fine, but don't censor it. That's really what they're
fear. They placed fear first.
Brilliantly, too.
Brilliantly.
Really good at it.
Fear's at the heart of all of it.
It absolutely is.
We're going to have to go into a break at the moment, after which Canadian parents have taken to the streets in cities across their country to tell the government they don't want their children taught about transgenderism in school. We'll be live to Canada.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, in Canada, parents, families were out in the street protesting because of things that are being taught to their children in school, some of it without their knowledge, far less their consent. It's interesting in many ways that to the fore were Muslim families saying that they objected to government insistence that their children's education about these and other matters was none of their business. It's a controversial topic, to say the least. Joining me now to consider the issue is Canadian journalist David Craden of the Post Millennial. David, thanks for joining me.
Real pleasure to be here, Neil.
David, actually, before we get into the schools protest, the families protest, I mentioned earlier on the ovation for the Nazi in the Canadian Parliament, and I think your publication broke that story.
We were the first publication in Canada to talk about it, yes. And it was with a little trepidation that I wrote the story and sent it to my editor because we didn't have 100% of the facts. But I know enough about that history. And the first thing I noticed was that why were we honoring anybody who was fighting the Russians during the Second World War when the Russians were our allies? Canada, the United States, Great Britain, other Commonwealth countries were allied with Russia at that time. So obviously this guy was not fighting on our side. And I said, there's something wrong here. And of course, any subsequent research revealed that yes, he was part of the 14th Waffen-SS Grenadier Galicia Division, which changed its name to the 1st Ukrainian Division to distract attention from its origins. But clearly, this was not only an international embarrassment, this was a horrendous act by Justin Trudeau. And I blame Justin Trudeau, not just the Speaker of the House, former Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota.
Has there been any meaningful fallout? Have there been any consequences beyond, I saw the Speaker of the House taking responsibility as though he had overruled the Prime Minister's office to make it happen?
No, this is what's so frustrating, Neil, is that Justin Trudeau has continued to distract attention from him. He never wants to take responsibility or accountability for his own idiotic decisions. And the fact that he's supposed to be the leader of Canada, he forgets that when it's convenient to do so. He has blamed the Speaker. He threw the Speaker under the bus. The Speaker took the bullet for him. And then he has the gall to suggest this is all somehow related to Russian propaganda and Russian misinformation. But we now know, Neil, that the daughter-in-law of Mr. Yaroslav Hunka was posting on the very day he appeared a picture of Hunka waiting to meet with Justin Trudeau and Vladimir Zelensky. So clearly, both of them knew he was coming. Both of them were very approving of it, and they all were in on this together.
It's a story that leaves, I think, most of us breathless with disbelief, really. But to park that there for the moment, and I've really invited you along this evening to talk about the protest, the million people, however it was badged up, the strong protest in Canadian towns and cities. What was it that pulled those people out onto the streets?
Well, this was a remarkable event in Canadian history, and I called it that. I don't know if we have ever had an event that attracted so many people. There were not just 1 million people marching, and it was billed as the 1 million March for Children. There were probably about 1.5 million people across Canada, from Halifax to Vancouver, who were out marching, and it was an all-faith march. We had Muslims, evangelical Christians, Roman Catholics, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs. We had people from all faiths, and it was a non-partisan event. Some political parties wanted to capture the event. The organizers insisted everyone was welcome. And that's one of the reasons I became so involved in this, because it was nonpartisan. And I wanted to applaud my Muslim friends for finally energizing Canadians to get off of their seats and to go into the streets and to say, we've had enough of this gender ideology in our schools. We've had enough of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, provincial governments, school trustees, and teachers' unions saying they know best for our children. The state knows best, and parents butt out. And it's time to say no, and so many parents feel the same way right now.
What is the situation? Since you raised the dichotomy, is it when it comes down to it, is it the family or is it the state in Canada that says what goes when it comes to children? And do the parents have to be made aware of what decisions have been made about children?
Well, currently there are only 2 provinces, because education in Canada is a provincial mandate, unlike in the UK. It is a provincial mandate, so we only have 2 premiers standing up against what is essentially a denial of parents to even know if children under this age of 16 decide to change their gender and their pronouns. New Brunswick and Saskatchewan are fighting back. The rest of the provinces are allowing a system where parents are not even allowed to know, let alone give their permission if children want to do something as consequential as this. And I say children cannot buy a drink. They cannot get a pint of scotch. They cannot buy a firearm. They cannot vote. They cannot drive a car. But somehow the education system says they can make a decision to change their gender, which could lead to chemical castration. I don't know anything more consequential than that. It's a lot more consequential than buying a pint of scotch.
David, bear with me. I have guests in the studio that I'd like to involve in this conversation. Greg, how do you react to that? This idea that it's up to the state and not the parents how children are, how they exist outside the home.
It's completely outrageous. And it's another example of the government and these institutions that have either co-opted the government or been co-opted by unelected bureaucrats. And also you have the academia, for example. So you have all these institutions, but especially the teachers' unions that David pointed out and the government that are telling parents, we know best for your children. And that is completely outrageous. And I'm so glad to see the Canadians taking it to the streets. It's not something that I would have expected. I always view Canada as more liberal or more left-leaning, and perhaps they are. But people have just had enough. And it happened in the U.S. already. In the last 2 years, the pushback has been phenomenal. And it's happened here in the UK with great organizations like Us for Them. And